Hello everyone, welcome back to Be Provided Conservation Radio. Today is a replay episode of my 2020 interview with Beth Pratt. She is the California Regional Executive Director for National Wildlife Federation and co-creator of Save LA Cougars, which is a campaign to build one of the largest crossings over Highway 101, one of the busiest highways in LA. And this will be for wildlife such as the famous mountain lion P-22. The reason I wanted to replay this episode is to honor P-22, and I do so with a heavy heart. The world-famous Hollywood mountain lion was compassionately euthanized on December 17, 2022. Biologists and veterinarians with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife had to make the difficult decision to end P-22's suffering and help him transition peacefully into the next place. This is a summary in a written eulogy that Beth Pratt sent out regarding P-22 that describes a little bit of what the poor guy was suffering from. Here's the quote. Before I say goodbye, I sat in a conference room with team members from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and the team of doctors at the San Diego Safari Park Zoo. They showed me a video of P-22 CT scan, images of the results, and my despair grew as they outlined the list of serious health issues. They had uncovered from all their testing stage 2 kidney failure, a weight of 90 pounds, he normally weighs 125, head and eye trauma, a hernia causing abdominal organs to fill his chest cavity, an extensive case of demodex gatoi, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it is a parasitic skin infection likely transmitted from domestic cats. He had heart disease and, unfortunately, more. The most severe injuries resulted from him being hit by a car last week, and I thought how terrible it was that this cat, who has managed to evade cars for a decade, in his weakened and desperate condition, could not avoid the vehicle strike that sealed his fate. End quote. I will post the beautifully written eulogy written by Beth Pratt in our show notes. It's difficult to not cry when thinking of P-22. He overcame so much in his life and taught the world so much about mountain lions and that they can really coexist with humans if given a chance. It has been amazing to see the outpour of sympathy for P-22. The story of his death reached the LA Times newspaper above the fold, no less. And today I saw a story in the Rolling Stones and in the Guardian of the UK. So this handsome bachelor of Griffith Park captured the hearts of so many people all over the world. So during the heat of the pandemic, when we were all still in lockdown, I was curious to learn more about P-22, so I asked Beth to be on the show, and we did a Facebook Live event to discuss many things, but mostly P-22 and her book, When Mountain Lions Are Our Neighbor. I have included highlights of our live event in this replay. Unfortunately, I had to overdub some of the audio on my questions to Beth because for some reason, it didn't transfer over from the Facebook Live to this format. But I did leave in topics and discussions of other mountain lion related things because they are also important as we forge ahead with conservation of these cats and other wildlife in our area and start creating and supporting the building of wildlife crossings over and under major freeways in our states. So enjoy the show and let's just celebrate the life of P-22. Beth, I was wondering if you could tell us how you got started in this field and was it easy or hard?
My first job out of college was an environmental manager for a big manufacturing company in Stockton, California. But, and it's sort of been in increasing degrees more and more into wildlife, which has always been what I've wanted to do. But much like I think, I graduated in the job market in 1991, for those of you who remember that time, which was a recession. So, whatever job we could get to pay the rent was, my wildlife had to come as as conditions changed, but I'm in the dream job for me now. So, the journey got me here.
Well, now you are the California Regional Executive Director for the Wildlife Federation, and I also refer to you, and I've heard others refer to you as the Cougar Lady, which is a cool title. And I was also wondering if you could talk a little bit about your role with the Wildlife Federation, and also a kind of a double loaded question. Can you talk a little bit about the ruling, I believe that happened yesterday, regarding mountain lions in Southern California being placed on the California Endangered Species List?
Yeah, I mean, Cougar Lady, right? I mean, it sounds like a big title, but, I'm also licking envelopes and, whatever it takes to save these cats. But yeah, the National Wildlife Federation is one of the oldest and largest conservation groups. I think we have like 6 million supporters nationwide. Ranger Rick, most people probably know National Wildlife from Ranger Rick. I grew up reading it. So to work for an organization that helped shape me into wanting to protect wildlife. But I think it's 6, we've changed sometimes, 6 regions nationwide, and there's a regional executive director for each region. So there's 5 more of me. I'm the only region that's just one state, but I'm the biggest region because it's California. We have 40 million people here. And, I can't think of a better place to do conservation work in. California really has some of the most has the most and best protections for wildlife, I think, in the country. So it's a great state to do wildlife, and the people too here just love their wildlife. I mean, again, we have some of the best protections of wildlife here in the country, if not on the planet. And wow, I mean, you just think California can't up the bar, but it does, right? I mean, we just raise the bar in the stratosphere. So really big shout out to first the Center for Biological Diversity and the Mountain Lion Foundation, who petitioned the California Fish and Game Commission to at least see if these threatened populations, so not all mountain lions in California, but these threatened populations that are way too fragmented in these urban areas and losing genetic diversity would be warranted for listing under the state, not the federal, but the State Endangered Species Act. And so the way the process works, they petition. California Department of Fish and Wildlife, led by the awesome director Chuck Bonham, then has to have 90 days to take a look at it. And if they think the science, it has to be the science, warrants further consideration, they then kick it back to Fish and Game saying, yes, we think it warrants further consideration, which they did. And the Fish and Game Commission then has to vote on whether they agree. And they did. It was a riveting meeting, at least if you follow ESA or mountain lion science, full of lots of public comment. And I got chills at the end. The commission, all 5, voted to unanimous to that then gets into the year-long review to see if it warrants final listing. But some of the protections kick in right away for these mountain lions, which is good news. And we can talk about some of the, the issues they face later. But the conservation significance of this is like, I can't underscore it enough, even for progressive California. You're talking about mountain lions being an endangered species, or at least these populations, not little frogs that have a small area, right? What you're basically saying is you're considering enacting protections for about a third for land habitat, about a third of California, which is analogous to like protecting all of New England, right? For for an animal, big area. And on top of that, this isn't a frog or sage grouse. This is a mountain lion, right? Where most areas seek to rid yourself of them, at least other states. Here, we let one live in LA and are considering protections. So this is significant. And it's also significant because these cats aren't going to remain on the landscape if we don't do something. And all these commissioners recognize that we don't want to lose this piece of our wild heritage. But so this is significant, but it just but it's not out of left field. Again, California is the only state in the country where special protections exist for mountain lions. You can't hunt them for sport. Indeed. And in, P-56, the situation that happened, God, I can't even, so much has happened in March. I don't even, time is meaningless, but I think it was a couple.
Shot, right?
He was shot legally, I will add, under the current state law, if a mountain lion does prey on your livestock or pets, you do have the right to shoot that animal. But I think we were heartbroken over his death, but I think what it did, which was good, is really had people all the way up to the governor take a look at, wait a minute, there's some loopholes in this law we need to fix, because P-56 was part of one of these threatened populations. He was only one of two known males, and you take one out, you're now putting that population, like, you may be game over. That other male gets hit by a car, we are now in critical points. So for the sake of a few goats, and not that I'm downplaying people who have livestock or animals, but there needs to be some precedence given to native wildlife, especially these threatened populations. Indeed, when we know that coexistence is possible. I mean, right now not right now, but before, under the current law, you could literally tie a goat to a tree, which would kind of be baiting. You'd still have the legal right to shoot. There was in the current law that called for that you had to kind of take some protections. That did change a couple of years, was it a year ago? Was it where, at least in the Santa Monica Mountains and Santa Ana's two threatened population, California Fish and Wildlife had to at least, you had to prove you were doing something, sort of a 3 strikes. But even then, it wasn't like, rigor, and, you could sort of try to do a few things. So I think this is really going to come about. It's not that you can't have livestock, and it's not that we want mountain lions to be eating livestock or pets, but I have to say, as someone, I don't have livestock, but I have 5 dogs and 2 cats. I take measures to protect. For me, it's the native wildlife, and there are measures. NWF, we put our money where our mouth is. When a mountain lion was P-45, some might remember, was the woman had taken out a depredation permit. Mountain Lion Foundation, the National Park Service went and tried to educate her. We donated $2,500 for her to build an enclosure. And so, there's ways we can coexist on the landscape. It's not, it takes some responsibility on our part, and it does take some financial commitment. But I think, nonprofits especially, and even the government agencies, we are here to help. I mean, the last resort should be killing an animal, in my mind, whether it's a species that's threatened or not. So anyway, yeah, wow, we are celebrating today. I'm it's a huge, to me, beyond that, we're these mountain lions, if we don't do something, will disappear. It's just a huge statement, too, that we are clearly on the side of native wildlife here. I think if my take is, we're in their homes, right? I mean, we are, and we should accommodate that. If you're someone who doesn't want to live with wildlife, there are places you can move where you will not have to, deal with them. If your livelihood, like if you're a cattle rancher, then yeah, we need to find ways that your business doesn't get disrupted. But there are programs for that, again, that don't have to resort in lethal take,
So on occasion, we do hear very, very rarely when mountain lions do attack humans. And I believe there was just an incident in Cupertino not long ago. No one was hurt, but a mountain lion was found that actually, I believe, grabbed a child off the trail, and the child was rescued, and no harm, no serious harm or anything, I'm sure, just scared. But the mountain lion was shot for this incident, or a mountain lion was shot for this incident. Is it necessary to shoot the lion in these cases, or can they be relocated?
My own personal views. I mean, my own personal view, if I'm out hiking in Yosemite or Yellowstone, where I lived, or let's say a grizzly or a mountain lion takes me out, I've always told my parents, do not let them kill them. If it was in their territory, and but listen, I sympathize with the government agencies as much as, I'm very much more on the spectrum of animal rights, and animals have a right to live. On the other hand, if you are a government agency managing public safety, people are going to sue you if you don't do something. And I think that, and also public tolerance. I do think if you do have a cat that for some reason is attacking people, and it's rare, as we know, it is extremely rare. And as you noted, a lot of these are, not all, but a lot of these are juveniles who don't quite have it down yet. They don't quite know, what, listen, if we were really on the menu, and I just had this, talk of mountain lions, we'd all be dead. I mean, they are stealth hunters, right? But we're not. We are clearly not. In California, just alone, over 100 years with over 40 million people, there's been less than 20 attacks, and only 6 of those have been deaths. Now, listen, it is tragic when someone's killed, and we don't want that to happen. But we take risks every day with our lives, and you need to put the mountain lion risk in perspective. What Justin Dellinger, the CDFW biologist, was on, he's like, you have more chance getting hit by an asteroid, put it in perspective. But on the, should wildlife be killed for attacking people? The relocating wildlife, especially wildlife like mountain lions and bears, it rarely works, especially if you have I don't even want to use the word problem, because usually these problems are created by us. Okay. I worked in Yosemite for a decade, and one of the first things I worked on was the Keep Bears Wild program. So Yosemite, as we know, had terrible problems with bears breaking into cars and, causing property damage. No attacks, interestingly enough. There's never, the only person that's ever died by wildlife in Yosemite has been from a deer, right? And I will say, overall, that tracks in the state of California. There's, I don't think there's been a death, or if ever in recorded history, or at least in the last 100 years. We have really chill bears. They're more after our food than us, right? And plus, they're black bears. We don't have grizzlies here anymore, sadly. But so once, it was really interesting. Once the park, what they were having to do for the longest time, they were having, almost $750,000 in property damage. Bears knew how to break into cars. They're going in the trash bins. But when they really flipped the switch, it was not a bear problem. It was a human problem. What did they do? They put responsibility on us. You couldn't leave food in your car. You had to store it. The incidence went way down, right? But what they were doing before that is relocating bears. In fact, some of the bears, black bears that live in the Angeles National Forest, came from the 50s, from the bears in Yosemite that were, being, at least in our term, bad, but bears really. So relocation doesn't work. You just either put the problem somewhere else, or they try to come back. Mountain lions, same thing. So people ask, like, why don't you relocate like P-22 and put him somewhere where he has more room? Well, there's no open mountain lion space. There's no open bear space. You plop a mountain lion somewhere else, there's a dominant male there who's already eked out the territory. So you're introducing conflict somewhere else, and likely resulting in the death of that animal or an animal. So, and think about it. It's the same with us. If tomorrow, I took you and plop you down 100 miles away, you're going to be stressed. You don't know the situation. You don't have food. It increases the potential for conflict. So relocation is usually not a good option. Now there's a difference between relocation and, like, what they will do, like when a mountain lion in its own territory comes into a neighborhood, and that in itself is not unusual. And, CFW, and rightly so, you get a call, there's a mountain lion in my backyard. Well, cool. Mountain lions just being in a human space is not cause for concern. But if a mountain lion's a little too, or appears like it can't get out, or, is near a school, yeah, they'll relocate it, but to within its own territory. They're not going to take it hundreds of miles away. So that it is often a difficult choice for these wildlife agencies. And the other thing they get asked, well, why don't you put a problem animal in a sanctuary? Well, an adult mountain lion is not going to do well in a sanctuary. They, if younger cats, like kittens that are abandoned, yes, but you plop a 5-year-old mountain lion in a sanctuary, that is a tough go for an animal that's been wild a long time. It's not that it doesn't happen, but that's still tough too. So there's not a lot of good options. You're often having to choose between tough choices and no ideal options. So I sympathize. Again, I have my own personal views on this, but I sympathize with the choices these wildlife managers have to make day to day, balancing wildlife well-being and public safety and public support for wildlife.
I know it's difficult to predict, but based on the science and the research that your group and other groups have done, how long do you think that mountain lions, especially in Southern California, have before they are no longer in those areas?
It's obviously we can't predict exactly, but the National Park Service scientists, who I am just so fortunate to be working with on this project, they've done rigorous. In fact, the Santa Monica Mountains population, probably next to the Florida Panthers, the most studied mountain lion population probably in the world. So we have really good data. And, the Park Service has been doing this research now since 2002. So we have some long-term data too. And again, we wouldn't even know these cats were in trouble or that we needed a wildlife crossing if it wasn't for their research. So again, science is awesome. Lead with the science, right? But so what they're finding by doing some modeling, first of all, that the Santa Monica Mountain cats, which are isolated south of the 101, they have, based on the genetic decline right now that they're seeing, right? So again, they're inbreeding. They're breeding with their daughters and their great-granddaughters and their great-great-granddaughters, right? And based on some of the other mortality factors there, so not just the genetic decline, like, getting hit by a car or rodenticides, they have at best, if we don't do something, 50 years. And so that, that sounds like a long time, but it really isn't, especially when we could have increased mortality events. So they have at best 50 years. And then if they start showing birth defects, like the Florida Panthers, right? We have the Florida Panther case to really watch. Those guys were literally next to, like, the next step was on their way out. They were showing birth defects like kink tails, one testes, so they couldn't even breed, right? So they had to bring in some, again, panthers is another name for mountain lion. They had to bring in some panthers from Texas to bring in some stock. So they've at least gotten the population up, but they haven't solved the connection. Their cats are still getting hit by cars and not able to. So we have about 50 years at best. And then if they start showing birth defects, that's like 10 to 15 years time horizon. So, and you're only talking about in this area, 10, maybe 12, maybe 15 cats, and so it's not a lot. And so, yeah, this is not a long time horizon, which is why, something like the ESA affords some protections, even though, again, it's still not finalized. Some of those protections kick in right away, which helps us manage the situation better until we do get solutions in place, like the wildlife crossing, like banning rodenticides, things like that.
Before we have to let you go, I was hoping you could share the inspiring story about P-22, this world famous mountain lion.
Yeah, the P-22 story is a good one, and it's why, I don't sleep anymore working on this project. But I had I just started my job with the National Wildlife Federation, so I just come back from Yellowstone. I had always kept my home here because although Yellowstone was a dream to work in, California is always going to be home, even though I'm originally from Boston, but I'm Californian by choice. After I came out here after college, and it was just like, yeah, I'm never leaving. But I had just come back from Yellowstone, and one of the first things I was doing on my job was writing a book about California wildlife. And the book it turned out to be, which you have when mountain lions are neighbors, is very different. Yeah, there it is. P-22 on the cover. But the book it started out to be, which was just kind of a general survey of California wildlife. There's actually not an updated book on that. It was very different than the book it turned out to be, which was really getting into this sort of urban coexistence, or at least wildlife coexistence with people. And he's the one who really, he changed everything for me, not just the book, like the focus of my work. Before that, I had worked primarily in national parks, Yellowstone, Yosemite, and was continuing to do that with this job. I was starting to work on some projects in these more typical wilderness areas. But I read about him in the LA Times, the P-22. In fact, he wasn't even called P-22 in this article. It was mountain lion found in Griffith Park. And like any good snobbish Northern Californian, I had been to LA maybe half a dozen times. I didn't even know where Griffith Park was. I just assumed LA was all, concrete. And so I actually didn't believe it. The term fake, there's my dogs. Yep. I knew that would happen. The term fake news wasn't a term at the time, but I certainly would have used it. I was like, there is no way a mountain lion's living in LA. It has to be fake. So I actually got in touch with Jeff Sikich, who was named, and he's one of the lead scientists on the project. And he's just an amazing guy. He's become a friend, him and his wife and their daughter, who I love. And, but at the time didn't know him. And I'm sure he's like, who's this crazy woman calling me? But he was so gracious, took me out for the day, took me to Griffith Park, but also to the greatest. I hadn't even, I think I had driven through I don't even think I had driven 101 through the Santa Monica Mountains. Maybe when 20 years ago when I first came to California. But I was just so blown away. We were walking around Griffith Park, and I outlined this in the TEDx talk I did. I had this a life-changing epiphany, because at first I was like, oh my God, this cat needs to get out of here. There's people everywhere, and they're cycling and cars and playing golf, and there's pony rides and a merry-go-round. But he's telling me about the challenges P-22 faced to get here, crossing 2 freeways, and about all the Santa Monica mountain cats and what their study had shown that, they were hanging on by a thread, but they were doing it. And it occurred to me like, okay, well, what other option does P-22 have? I mean, it's either this or death. So who am I to really judge whether he can live here? So why can't he live here? Like, that's my hang up, not his. He's saying it's okay. So at the end of the day, I turned to Jeff. I'm like, I'm just so inspired. Like, I'm just starting my work with the National Wildlife Federation. Is there anything I can help you with to further this research? And he's like, well, there's this little wildlife crossing we've been trying to get built. And there you have it. It changed the book. It changed, the focus of my work, conservation work with the National Wildlife Federation. So yeah, that's how I got.
Here I asked Beth about her project about Save LA Cougars and what that's all about. So here is her answer.
You Save LA Cougars. Yeah, it really did. It influenced my strategy here in California. In fact, we were just putting together a strategic plan for the work we would do in California, because I was still new at my job, and it shifted to almost entirely urban. And we did also, we had this great advisory board for California where I invited all these people, from business people to scientists to sort of further that strategy. And Jeff actually attended some of those meetings. And we really switched to this sort of connectivity in these urban settings from a couple angles. One is connectivity from a purely biological and ecological perspective. So that's building the wildlife crossing, but not just crossings. That's also like butterfly corridors throughout cities. Like, how can we, because to me, and I am such a convert since, and the science is showing this too, that the model I grew up in, the North American model of conservation, which I was taught in when I went to school, you put aside a Yosemite, you put aside a wildlife refuge, these little islands, check, you save wildlife. Scientifically isn't valid anymore. You still need those. I am not at all advocating. We want spaces like that where wildlife sort of reigns supreme. On the other hand, we now know that large landscape connectivity, even for small animals, is necessary. And we also know that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be vast tracts of open space. And if you give wildlife a little help in cities, like planting, the appropriate milkweed, or opening up little corridors like P-22 was able to use, right? That is just as vital and impactful. So our approach really is twofold. One, to look at connectivity through a biological perspective, but I'm also going to add it's also to look at connectivity through a social perspective and how people connect to wildlife in these urban areas. And I think that's also what, the work we've been doing around P-22 is, to me, just as important as building a crossing. People are connecting to wildlife in ways, especially using P-22, that is going to produce lifelong advocates for wildlife, whether it be writing a hip hop song for wildlife, whether it, or for P-22, whether it be, kids writing letters to P-22 or building wildlife crossings in their classroom. He's become kind of this folk hero, which is such a great entry point. We have people giving to our cause who have never given to an environmental cause before. Wow, and it's because there's this way we've approached it, not like a typical conservation campaign. Listen, we just said the science is paramount. We lead with the science. If the science didn't tell us to build a wildlife crossing, we're not going to build it. On the other hand, the science doesn't save animal species. As we know, it saves it because we know how to, but if the public will isn't there, it doesn't matter. We have plenty of species that have gone extinct despite reams of scientific papers telling us how not to. It's capturing that public imagination and will. That's the storytelling side. And that's what, that connection point we focus on also with our work. How do you connect people to wildlife in ways that are meaningful? And that's been just as, for me, rewarding as the actual, again, building a crossing.
Somehow we transitioned back into the conversation about P-22 and how he is doing. And I asked how long he has been there and how is his health at this time.
We, pretty much assumed those first camera photos of him was about when he arrived there. That was 2012. So he's been there since then. Like you said, he's in a territory, he's doing something great. And indeed, a fun fact I learned recently. I didn't know this, I guess. I should have, even with, my biology background and studying mountain lions. But I was just interviewing Jim Williams on my live show. And book, I was rereading it just, last night, or at least I'd read it when it came out. But mountain lions are more closely related to house cats than African lions. I think that's such a great fun fact. Anyway, but he's my little mountain lion. But, oh God, what was the question you would ask? Oh, he's in a smaller territory than he should be, but perhaps not surprisingly, because he crossed 2 freeways to get there. He's been there since 2012. He really hasn't made much of a move to leave, but I'm sure in his mind, he's like, oh my God, I'm not going across those freeways again. And indeed, as we know from the study, most cats don't make it, right? Actually, God, was it last, the P-61 was, had actually crossed the 405, but then met the dominant male that was hanging out there. He wasn't collared. And literally they caught this on camera, on security cameras. That male chased him back. So at that point had 2 options: fight the dominant male or try to get back across the 405. And he chose the 405 and got hit, sadly. But it just shows you again the challenges these urban cats face. And that's the challenge. So yeah, but so P-22, that's the choice I think he has made, which is that, listen, I'm surrounded by freeways. I'm probably not going to get lucky like I did before, right? This place is cool. There's plenty of prey. And indeed, that's what these territory sizes are defined by, is prey density, right? So cats where there's a lot of deer may have a smaller territory, where cats who have a shortage of deer may have broader territories. For the most part, for a male, it's about 100 to 200 square miles. So he's in 8 square miles, right?
Wow.
So far, he's got plenty of food, so that's probably why he's hung around. But yes, it would be better if he didn't live full-time in Griffith Park, but could rove, right? But of course, that's impossible with, the freeways that are surrounding him. So, but he's doing good. In fact, we just had Jeff on the P-22 Presents. He's getting up there for a mountain lion.
Do you think any female mountain lions will wander over, or is P-22 destined to be a lifelong bachelor at this time?
No, and it's unlikely. Females don't tend to wander as much as males. There is that unnamed cat that chased P-61. He's hanging around in between the 405 and the 101, if you look on a map, and hasn't crossed the 101 yet, which would lead him to Griffith Park. I mean, there's really no other green space there, which would be interesting because, 2 males in Griffith Park, that would introduce some very interesting dilemmas, I think, for wildlife managers. But yeah, I mean, I never say never with wildlife. They always do things that astound us and is outside of our comprehension. I mean, P-22 even showing up there. But yeah, it's unlikely he's ever going to have a mate just because of that. But but I think some of us have come to terms with bachelorhood, and it's not all that bad. I will tell you this, though, which does make me a little sad. Miguel Ordiana, who helped discover the first photo of P-22, and hi, Miguel, if you're watching, they have cameras, and the Park Service has cameras, but, a lot of these cameras now come with sound. I mean, these wildlife cameras are getting good. Miguel had footage of him that he captured, and I'm sure he's continuing to capture, but I remember when this first came up like a year or two ago, of P-22 making noise. Now, mountain lions are extremely quiet. They are ghost cats, but except for when they're mating, my God, it sounds like people are being murdered. So, but he caught P-22 on camera making the sound for mountain lion, which is a lot like, mountain lions make, again, they're quiet, but if you have a house cat, again, related, like my cat will do that clicking noise when they see birds or something. So P-22 was making a sound that was, hey, is anybody out there? So he hasn't given up, So I think that's, he hasn't given up yet, but boy, it must be, being the last year kind. And even mountain lions who are not social, they live alone. Yeah. They fight to the death over territory. They are very much a love him and leave him species. P-22 really just wants a date for a couple days and then whatever he's set for a while, right? But still, even then, he's putting out signals like, hey, anybody answering my call? So, but otherwise he's healthy. Again, he is getting up there, but.
So you don't know how old he is exactly.
Well, they guess just from, when he got into Griffith Park, and obviously the things they can tell, like teeth, and they think, God, 2012 years too. He's almost 10, 9 or 10. Mountain lions in the wild, you're talking like 10 to 13. But here's and I think a lot of people, he's in the wild, but he's not totally in the wild for mountain lions. So one of the main stressors on male mountain lions especially is fighting territory.
Right.
And indeed, the reason P-22 is still so handsome and pretty, you look at cats, mountain lions, photos of mountain lions his age in other places, even the rest of the Santa Monica Mountains, they're all craggly and scarred like a tomcat because they've been having to defend their territory, right? But he's doesn't have that stress.
That's good.
So he may live a little longer. I don't know. I mean, it's going to be interesting. He also has some threats that, like rat poison. He suffered that one.
In the live version of this, where the video is playing, I show a picture of P-22 with mange. He looks very, very sad and distraught. And I will try to post a picture of this in the show notes. This was in 2014, and rehabilitators and rescuers were able to capture P-22 and treat him properly. So he is believed to have fully recovered from the rat poison, but it is always a threat for him living in such an urban area.
Yes, exactly. So, he does have threats like that, which, it's hard to tell. He could suffer it again. And that's why, part of this California ESA listing is that, they would have to look at having these sorts of things in areas where, if they are listed as endangered. Groups like Poison Free Malibu. There you go. You got it.
He had mange,
not
the poor guy.
like majestic cat he should be. So yeah, he got exposed to anticoagulant rodenticides, which are horrible. Like, just stop using them. And again, that's why groups like Poison Free Malibu, who are doing awesome work, and like Assemblymember Richard Bloom, who's introduced some bills and trying to get passed to ban these things. He got exposed to it, and these are horrible deaths when you die for it. You basically bleed internally. But what they also do, the mange is kind of a secondary, condition of that, where their immune system, usually, mange is nothing new and animals suffer from it, but they usually can throw it off because their immune systems are healthy. But these poisons weaken immune systems so much that, P-22 is really suffering from it. So luckily he's monitored, right? So they caught him on film looking bad. The Park Service caught him, was able to treat him for it. But he could get exposed again. There's nothing, they're still prevalent. So, but otherwise though, he's looking healthy. He's doing good. We just caught him, this couple, we posted it on his page, literally was like their dining room. He was using their backyard or side yard to travel every night for, because these mountain lions will go back to a kill for a few nights in a row. And they just kept seeing P-22 walk through their yard. And one night, literally, they got their camera and he just turned and looked at them. And they got this great photo of him just, hey, how's it going? And then walking through their yard. But he gets picked up on Ring cameras a lot. But it just shows you he's figured out. I mean, he's a cat that has proven to be extremely adaptable to urban living. I would say that not all cats. I mean, mountain lions and all wildlife, we tend to think of them as groups and instinctual, but they're not. They're individuals. And P-22 has a personality. He's got a pretty chill personality, if you ask me. Other cats may not have stayed. Other cats may not have made that journey. And other cats may have gotten into some conflict by now. But he's really an adaptable urban cat. I mean, he's figured it out. And, mountain lions are usually, a lot of them not so tolerant to people. And he's figured out how to kind of keep to himself and make the occasional splash, whether it be munching on a koala or taking a nap in somebody's crawl space. But other than that, he's a pretty chill cat.
Well, I think we'll end the show here, this replay of our interview in 2020 with P-22 being a pretty chill cat. And rest in peace, you handsome boy. And thank you for all you've done in educating us humans how to coexist with other cats and other wildlife. And I'm sorry we didn't learn these lessons sooner in your lifetime, P-22. But know you have paved the way for other mountain lions to hopefully live in more connected habitats. And we are seeing success. I have included the link to the Wallace-Annenberg Wildlife Crossing Project in Southern California in our show notes at beprovided.com, or you can also visit savelacougars.org. And since the 2020 interview, the ground has been broken and construction has begun, and you can actually see some cams showing live construction as this project moves forward. And so I believe completion of this project should be done around 2025 if all goes as expected. And I also wanted to include, which is also on that same website, a link to Beth's moving eulogy to P-22. So thank you everyone for listening, and rest in peace, P-22.